Well, if you were here a couple weeks ago, you saw that we're in the midst of a new series. I kicked us off 2 weeks ago. Pastor Ron talked with us last week. We are going through this idea of what it means to be unoffendable. So today, we're going to unpack more of the absolute joy of being unoffendable. But before we do that, if you have a Facebook-enabled device, or if you are on YouTube, would you share the live stream that's going on those, like and subscribe? And I know it sounds hokey for me to say this each week, but the way those systems are built, the more we do that, the more their analytics work in our favor, and the more it puts it out to people in our community. And I believe this is a message you need to hear. But before I begin with the message, I want to do the same thing I did 2 Sundays ago and give you a content warning. Because I'm pretty sure it's impossible to talk about being unoffendable, to talk about offending people without risking offending people, right? So, that being said, I need you to know something about me. I try not to share this with people because it offends them. In fact, I was talking to my mother this week on the phone, and I told her what I was going to share, and she audibly gasped, "You can't say that in church. People are going to be offended." And I went, well, maybe I'm right on target then. That works. So here it is, without sugarcoating it. I don't really like animals. Now, before you throw rocks, I like when you have animals. I like visiting other people's animals, and we've got some sugar gliders. They're cute little things. Those are great. They're hypoallergenic. They're nice. But it's like when somebody hands you a baby, and you're like, "This is the most beautiful thing ever," and then you're like, "Oh, it pooped. Take it back." That's the way I feel about animals. Shame, for the live stream, she said, "Shame on me." That's awesome. See, I warned you before we started, didn't I? See, there's reasons for this, though, and I'm going to share them in a moment, but just that idea, it offends people. I mean, nowadays, we have, what do they call them, fur babies, and, people are adopting animals the same way they adopt children, and, I get it. I don't get it, but I get it, right? Before you judge me, though, I want to remind you of the process we're going through in this series. And by the way, I picked the cutest possible animals just to up the contrast of what I was saying. But so as we're going through this series about being unoffendable, one of the things that we look at is what it means to understand someone. Proverbs 19:11, which is kind of the guiding verse for this series, says, "A person's insight gives him patience, and it's his virtue to overlook an offense." And so this morning, we're going to be really focusing in on this insight that gives us patience. And 2 weeks ago, I introduced a grid. If you didn't get a chance to write that down, I would highly recommend writing this down or drawing it in your impact guide or your bulletin. This is essentially a visual representation of Proverbs 19:11. And so the response you might have had when I put the cute little puppy up on the screen would be to have rage. Right? You're just mad. How dare he say that? That is not okay. Animals are the best thing. Animals are better than humans, right? Some people, oh, amen. That got a lot of amens. The amount of amens that got. Anyway, you might have a soft heart, but you have thin skin, and so you're a martyr. And so when I say that, you go, well, someone please think of the animals. The Sarah McLachlan commercial, "In the arms of an angel." And they've got the dog that's like wasting away. I mean, that would just get to anybody, right? Or your response might be like me. I'm the tank usually. I'm trying to be more unoffendable, but I'm usually a tank. I've got the skin that bullets bounce off of, but nothing gets to my heart, right? And so I say this, and you're like, whatever. That's you. Who cares? Just get out of here. But the goal that we're working towards is being unoffendable. That thick skin so that things bounce off, but a soft heart so that our hearts break for what breaks God's heart. And Proverbs 19:11 says, with insight, with understanding, something might change. And so let me share with you why I don't generally like animals. One reason is biologically. See, I have these airways that are right here, and anytime I'm around animal dander, they fight against me. They close up. We've been babysitting my mom's 2 big dogs for last week. I don't know if you can hear this, but that's me breathing out without trying to make any noise. Just that's my lungs right now. I can't biologically breathe. And so I grew up with animals, lots of animals in our house, and I could never breathe. I could never just run and jump and play. And I mean, yeah, sometimes, my gamer lifestyle, I was a little more sedentary than I should have been. But sometimes it was just because I legitimately couldn't get air into my lungs because of the animals. There was another reason. It's not just biologically, there's also an emotional reason behind it as well. You see, I grew up an only child, and my mom used to work multiple jobs to make ends meet, and we would also do what would now be called a side hustle, right? And so my mom figured out that if you breed and raise Persian cats, you can sell them for a lot of money. And all you need to do is just have a male cat and a female cat, and they keep making more of those things. So it's like a money factory. And so we would have multiple sets of adult Persian cats that lived in this area in our basement, and then they would keep producing these little tiny cats. And the little tiny cats would have to be, litter box trained and shown the ropes, but they wouldn't get it right all the time. And at one point in our history, the cats just decided that this area over by my bedroom, that's a little ways away from it, kind of by the furnace, that was the new litter box. And so one of them sprayed there, and if you have animals, you know what happens, right? Then the next one says, no, that's my spot. And then the next one says, no, that's my spot. And so they created this literal peeing contest right by my room. And so we tried doing the whole, cleaning it up. We rented a steam vac. We did all this. I mean, we did everything. We threw orange peels on the floor because that was going to do something to them. And eventually my mom gets this idea. Mothballs. I don't know if you've ever experienced mothballs. I have never since. I've probably actively blocked them off from my mind. But they're these little things, they're like between the size of marbles and ping pong balls, and they smell like a rotting corpse. And you sprinkle them on the floor on purpose so that the animals won't go over there and piddle. Except they took this as a challenge. And so now we not only had cat urine, we had mothballs, and now we had mothballs covered in cat urine. And not too far away from that was my closet where all of my wonderful shirts and pants and everything sat. And so this shirt right here, I'd take it off of my hangers, put it on, and I'm nose blind at this point. All I can smell is cat pee and mothballs at any given point. And so I go to school, and what happens? Who's the smelly kid? I don't know. It's probably not me. Oh, it is me, huh? Oh, I'm the guy who smells horrible. And guess what happens when you're the smelly kid? You get made fun of. So now I've got a biological reason. I've got a psychological reason. I've also got one really recent reason that just adds to the fuel to the fire. Last Sunday, I was getting ready for church, and we're babysitting my mom's 2 dogs. And at that point, Renee and the kids were in Oklahoma City visiting some family. And so I get up extra early, and my mom's dog is a little older. It has some issues staying incontinent overnight. And so I go downstairs and find some surprises downstairs that I have to clean up. But the dog also requires about 15 pills in the morning just to stay alive. And I've got to stuff them into a Cheez-It ball and shove it in the dog's mouth. And so then I go upstairs and get showered up, and I'm looking at my watch, and I'm like, okay, well, I've only got a few minutes, so I'm not going to have time to eat breakfast. So I pour myself a bowl of cereal. I grab my iPad, grab my coat, and I'm going to go downstairs. And because the dog is a little older and its hips don't work too well, we have to put this baby gate at the bottom of the stairs. And it's this nice thick one, like not those little wood ones that have the little tiny lattice, like it's like this thick of a lip on it. So I climb over the baby gate and I go this way and something happens. I'm in trouble. I am hooked, and I'm trying to use my Taekwondo balance, right? And it's just not working, and I'm tugging, and finally I tug, and it lets go, and so do I. And so I fall down this direction, but the whole time I'm holding a bowl of cereal, and I am expertly balancing that thing so that nothing spills as we go. And so I go down on my arm, I jar my whole back, my shoulder, but I held that bowl of cereal up until impact. I'm not a physics professor, but there's some sort of equal opposite reaction. And when you hit and do this, milk goes everywhere. And so now I'm laying on the floor, I'm sore, my glasses are coated, I can't clean them. I've got like frosted flakes all through my hair. If you saw me last Sunday and you thought, oh, Lee gelled his hair for once. No, it was dried milk because I didn't have time to clean it up. Like I washed myself off. I've got stuff everywhere. Now I'm having to clean the basement again. It just isn't fun. I'm still sore this morning. A week later, right here where I landed. But maybe now you see, when I say, I don't really like animals, I'm not crazy entirely. I'll give a little, but not entirely. There's reasons. There's heartache. And when we seek to understand someone who's offending us, when we seek to uncover some of those deeper reasons that are going on, as Proverbs says, when we use insight and understanding, our hearts maybe soften just a little bit. So your key thought for this series as we've been going through it is this: the secret to being unoffendable is developing a thicker skin and a softer heart. Last week, Pastor Ron talked about what it looks like to have a thick skin. And so this morning, we're going to talk about what it means to have a softer heart. And as we tend to do here at Altitude Church, we're going to look at Jesus as our example. So turn in your Bibles, if you will, to John chapter 7. John chapter 7. If you don't have a Bible, there's one in the pew there in front of you. You can pull it up on your electronic device. We've been going through the gospel according to John for months now, just working step by step through so we can get a picture of who Jesus is. And now we're moving into chapter 7, which starts out with these words: after this. After this. So pause for a second. What is after this? Well, after this is the context of everything we've been talking about the last few weeks and the last couple series. Jesus heals, he performs miracles, he gets together, and the biggest moment is this feeding of the 5,000, right? 5 to 15,000 people who get a free meal miraculously, and they start following Jesus. But then if you remember last week and the week before, Jesus gives one sermon and offends everybody. Eat my flesh, drink my blood, and people say, we are out. And so what starts to happen is the Jewish leaders, who already are pretty upset and offended at Jesus, decide that maybe it's time to plot against him and kill him. And so you see, Jesus traveled in Galilee. He did not want to travel in Judea because the Jews were trying to kill him. The Jewish festival of shelters was near. We're going to talk about that in a week or two. There's a lot of context I want you to understand. But for now, let's go on to verse 3. So his brothers said to him, leave here, go to Judea so that your disciples can see your works that you are doing. For no one does anything in secret while he's seeking public recognition. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. So what's going on here? First off, you might have noticed Jesus has brothers. You might come from a tradition that says that Mary was a virgin in perpetuity throughout her whole life. It just doesn't hold weight with Scripture. He had at least 4 brothers, possibly some sisters. Jesus is an older brother, and he's dealing with some younger brothers. Could you imagine what it would be like to be Jesus' younger brother? Like, anybody grow up in the home of an honor student or anything? A few of you, yeah. Not only did you raise your hand, but you tilted your head and went like this, like gave me the over the glasses look. That was great. That was great. So just imagine you come home and you're like, Mom, Dad, look at what I did. I got first place. I got a ribbon. You're like, yeah, well, your brother's the son of God. So what do you got now? Like, whoa, okay, sorry. Like, you get mad. Like, Jesus did something. Like, yeah, right. I mean, you realize he's the Messiah, right? And so his brothers have entered onto the scene, and they're having this conversation with him, and they're basically ridiculing him. I mean, it's kind of hard to see because, we don't pick up on the nuance of some of these things all the time, but basically they're saying, so, hotshot, you've got this big fancy ministry where everybody's following you around. You've got disciples, and yet you're hiding out in your hometown. Like, we don't think of Jesus as hiding very often, but he's strategically hiding right now at this moment in his ministry. And so his brothers are like, if you really want to, be known and be famous and be popular, you should be out there. Why don't you go to Judea? Well, we've already seen that the people in Judea are trying to kill him. So his brothers, maybe they don't realize what they're saying, but there might be something in the text that clues us in that they are basically like, why don't you go off where everybody wants to kill you? Thanks, family. So appreciate the encouragement. In his book, Michael Card, one of the background resources we've used during this, says in verse 3, we have our only glimpse of Jesus' relationship with his brothers. Matthew, one of the other gospel writers, provides a list of their names: James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas, or Jude as he is more commonly known. Next slide. James and Jude will become believers after the resurrection, but for now, they are antagonists. Antagonists. Mocking the fact that Jesus is acting in secret. Now, it's one thing when some random person on the internet offends you, right? There's anger that rises up. You want to have that righteous upset. Maybe you want to punch him in the face in Jesus' name. But whatever it is, it's easier to let go, right? But what happens when it's your own family? What happens when the person that you grew up with not only offends you, but is attacking you? What happens when someone who's supposed to be on your team, bears the same blood, comes against you? What was Jesus's possible responses? Well, he says in another place he could call down a legion of angels if he wanted to, right? So he could surround his brother and angels and just give them the worst wedgies you have ever seen and be like, see, I got this. But instead, Jesus follows the wisdom of Solomon, and I believe applies some insight to the situation. Jesus is unoffendable, and the key to being unoffendable is a thicker skin and a softer heart. Look at verse 5. It says this. Go one more over to verse 5. It says, for not even his brothers believed in him. We're going to stay there for just a moment. This is in parentheses. Now, in the original Greek, there was no punctuation. There was no parentheses. There actually wasn't even lowercase, uppercase, or space between letters. So, that's a fun language to study. But these scholars have added these parentheses because they're trying to help you understand something in this. Jesus' brothers are attacking him, so why? He's Jesus after all, right? Why would they be attacking him? But we see quite clearly they didn't believe. They didn't understand who he was. Imagine that your brother or your cousin or maybe a parent or a child all of a sudden is burst onto the scene, and they're gaining thousands and thousands of followers. They're gaining all these disciples, and they're starting to walk around saying things like, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. That comes up later, but still, he's saying these things, eat my flesh, drink my blood, and the brothers are just going, did you hear what Jesus said the other day? Are you hearing these rumors of what's going on? He thinks he's the Messiah. Now, the Messiah was this prophesied individual through all of Jewish history for generations. The entire nation was looking forward to this person who they believed would come in and overtake Rome and would bring about God's kingdom in this powerful way and maybe even rule with an iron fist. And now Big Brother is saying, hey, I am he. They don't believe. They don't think it's there. Maybe you've had a brother or a sister not believe in you. Maybe you can remember a time where something happened and you came home and you told a brother and sister, and they're like, yeah, right. You just make stuff up. You're a liar. That's kind of a more, basic way of seeing what they're doing. But it gets right to the heart of it. And again, look at the grid for offendableness here. Look at what Jesus' options would have been. First and foremost, go ahead and switch over to the grid. In the top left, if he was hard-hearted and thin-skinned, Jesus could have gotten angry. He could have raged at his brothers. He could have said, you know what? We may share the same mother, but my father could beat up your father, so let's go, right? Or he could have been a martyr. He could, Mom, Judas is picking on me again. Maybe there's some foreshadowing to that for another Judas later. He could have been a tank. He could have just said, whatever, just get out of my way. Just go sit over there. Stop bothering me. But Jesus chooses in a difficult situation with his own family to be unoffendable. He takes into understanding that these brothers of his just don't get it yet. Maybe he understands the familial relationship, that it might be a little bit harder for them to really believe because they're his family. Maybe he's taking into account the fact that some of them will likely believe after his resurrection. But whatever it is, Jesus is unoffendable. He doesn't respond in anger. He doesn't respond in pain. He simply moves things forward. Go to verse 6. It says this, Jesus told them, my time has not yet arrived, but your time is always at hand. The world cannot hate you, but it does hate me because I testify about it, that its works are evil. So maybe he's even giving them something that they can reflect on. Maybe they can be a little bit more understanding. Go to the next verse. So he tells them, go up to the festival yourselves. I'm not going up to this festival yet. If you're reading the CSB version, it won't have that word yet. Other versions do, but I think it's important to state because he will go up to the festival. And so if he's saying, I'm not going up at all, he's lying, which he isn't. He's just saying, I'm not going up there yet because my time has not yet fully come. And after saying these things, he continued to hide in Galilee. Jesus is kind. You don't hear him use some of the barbs that he'll use on religious leaders. It's not like Jesus was afraid of offending people, right? Remember 2 weeks ago we read through that verse, and what does Jesus say? Is this offending you? Right? Later on in his ministry, some of the disciples are going to come to him and say, Jesus, do you not understand that the Pharisees are offended? And what does he say? Blind guides follow blind guides. You're going to fall into a hole. Like, it's not kind words. It's not that he's unafraid to offend people, but he just understands that with his family, they don't get it. They don't get it. Solomon, the author of most of the Proverbs, also wrote something in Ecclesiastes. Perhaps. There's some dispute, but the teacher says this: do not take to heart all the things that people say. If we stopped right there, and that was the only piece of scriptural wisdom you gleaned from this morning, that alone could change your life. Just don't take to heart what people say. In other words, be thick-skinned. But it goes on, lest you hear your servant cursing you. And then it follows that pattern of Proverbs 19:11. It says, your heart knows that many times you yourself have cursed others. A thicker skin and a softer heart. Understanding the other person. Understanding that we've offended people. Understanding that these relationships, sometimes they're fragile. And sometimes when somebody lashes out, it's because something is going on in their life as well. Jesus recognized his brothers don't believe, and so he was softer hearted towards them. In your impact guide for this week's devotion and for this week's life group material, you're going to see a question. I would encourage you, if you're in your life groups, you're going to come across it this week. If you're not in a life group, I would encourage you either get into one or grab one of these guides and go through it yourself. But there's this little question in there, this little exercise. It says, picking a recent offense that you've suffered, share with the group some things about the other person that might have caused them to be more offensive. So in other words, maybe you went to the grocery store and the lady there just was mean. She was just angry. Hey, can you tell me this? What do you want? Like, whoa, what's going on? Maybe, just maybe, that woman at the grocery store just got some terrible health news. You know, maybe she's in financial straits, and it doesn't make it right, but it helps our hearts to understand. I want to walk you through my own processing of that question, because I think it's good to model it. I didn't pick a recent offense. I picked the biggest offense for me. Many of you know that my father and mother divorced early on. I bear the scars of an absent father wound every single day of my life. The reason that my mom had to get these side jobs, the reason that we had to have Persian kittens, what felt like hundreds of them everywhere, it was really only like 15 of them until we sold the next group and then the next group. But the reason we had to do that was because of the choices that my father made. And for a long season of my life, I just wanted to pretend he didn't exist, right? I just wanted to just say, you're dead to me, you're done. And yet there was still this longing in my heart that was missing something. Years later, God helped me to have insight. About 2007, my father started writing me from his first stay in the federal penitentiary in Arizona about how Jesus was changing his life. And he started to just say some things that I didn't really think much about at the time because I was still a tank. I still didn't want to have my heart soften towards this man. But he started talking about the relationship he had had with his father. His father was an absent father. He grew up in a broken home. Not only did he grow up in a broken home, but then his mother remarried and his stepdad and him just didn't get along. There were difficulties all over that relationship, and so he didn't feel like he could be at home. And so instead of doing that, he ran off, and at a very young age, like 15, 16, he just started to make his group of friends his support system. Good, bad, or indifferent, his group of friends had a certain way of living. There's a lot of drugs, a lot of alcohol, a lot of partying. And my father just didn't know better, but what I understand from that is the more that the drugs got into him, the more they started to rewire his physiology. The more he became addicted, the more he didn't even understand what he was doing. And so his cycle got worse. I'm not excusing my dad's actions, but I'm trying to understand them. I'm trying to understand. Because while I walked through a process where God refathered me in college, showed me what it meant for Jesus to be my father, my dad didn't get that process until the last couple years of his life. And so while he hurt me, and that's not okay, I do understand that but for the grace of God, there go I. Had I made a few different choices, I could have claimed the same things for my son. You know what? I didn't have a father, Logan. You know what? I decided that I was going to drown my sorrows in drinking. And based on my dad and some other past history, I've probably got a propensity for it. I would probably be pretty addicted if I started. You know what, Logan? I'm sorry I wasn't around that much, but, my head wasn't screwed on straight, and you turned out fine. Your mom's a great lady. She took care of you. When I understand the capability I have for that failure, when I understand what led to his failure, it doesn't make it okay. You need to hear that. but I start to understand. God took me through a process towards the end of my dad's life where I started softening my heart to him. Started allowing him to come around after his second and final stay in the federal pen. After he'd turned his life around, I let him come and meet his grandkids. This is him at our Sloan's Lake campus just a couple years ago. I put some healthy boundaries in place, but I forgave him. That path to forgiveness couldn't have happened if I didn't try to understand why he did what he did. So your challenge this week, the thing I want to encourage you to struggle through and wrestle with, giving yourself grace, is to pick a recent offense or a big one like mine and try to put yourself in that other person's shoes. The more you know about them, the more you'll be able to understand maybe what was happening. Sorry, my asthma's still getting to me this morning. The more you understand about their life, the more you can start to understand that what they did to you wasn't right. It doesn't excuse it. But maybe, just maybe, it'll help you have a little bit more grace for them and a little bit more grace for yourself and an opportunity to take one more step towards becoming unoffendable. As we close out the message each week, we give time for response. And one of the things that I'm realizing and understanding is that we're changing the culture of what response looks like. It's not just come down to the altar because you need to get saved. Sometimes it's just about having that encounter with a God who desperately wants to meet with you. And I believe that right now, God is wanting to heal some things in your heart. Not to excuse the pain or wipe it away, but to give your heart understanding and forgiveness, which leads to healing. And so if you're wrestling with that in your life right now, if you want to come down to the altars, you're welcome to. We also have the response stations off to the side and one at the back. You can take self-guided communion. We do communion together on the second Sunday of each month, and other weeks you come up, you just tear off a piece of bread, dip it into the juice, and remember that this is Jesus' body that was broken for you. And his blood, which is a new covenant, meaning that new things are possible. Would you pray with me? Jesus, I can't imagine, not having grown up with brothers or sisters, what it would be like to be the Messiah and have your own family not believe. But even more than that, Jesus, to hear these hard words, these go and get to Judea where they probably, maybe knew that you would be persecuted, maybe even killed before your time. Jesus, the way that you modeled an unoffendable life, would you allow that to come into our lives? Jesus, there are people in this room right now and people watching online. They have been holding on to hurt and pain for a long time. They've been offended, maybe even recently, by someone. And while it's okay to recognize that boundaries need to be in place and there has to be healthy reconciliation, God, maybe you're calling us, maybe you're calling each of us to open our hearts to some of the circumstances that inform those decisions. Jesus, would you transform us from the inside out? Help us to have thicker skin, softer hearts, and to be more like you. Jesus, it's in your holy name we pray. Amen. As you